It started with a knock on the door late at night. Vanessa had no idea that answering it would lead to murder, betrayal, and the most dangerous secret she had ever kept. But by the end of this story, you'll be asking the same question the detectives are. Who really pulled the trigger? It was supposed to be a simple arrangement. Malik Johnson, a smooth-talking, dangerously handsome man with a flair for luxury, knew how to play the game. A high-end escort for the wealthy and lonely, Malik had mastered the art of seduction, especially with married women looking for something different. His latest client, Vanessa Caldwell, wasn't just any bored housewife. She was wealthy, connected, and bored out of her mind. Her husband, Charles, a powerful businessman, had grown distant over the years, absorbed by his work and neglecting Vanessa's emotional and physical needs. Malik was the answer to her unspoken desires. It started innocently enough, an exchange of glances at a charity event, a few flirtatious texts, and then, before long, they were meeting in secret. Vanessa was captivated by Malik's charm, his body, his way of making her feel alive again. But what she didn't know was that Malik had a different agenda. He wasn't just after the thrill, he was after her money. And more than that, Malik had a habit of helping himself to a little more than his clients were willing to give. At first, Vanessa didn't notice. She was too wrapped up in the excitement in the way Malik made her feel desirable again. But slowly, Charles began to notice things missing. His expensive watch, a pair of gold cufflinks, even a necklace that had once been a gift to Vanessa. He didn't think much of it at first, assuming they had been misplaced, but suspicion began to creep in when the items didn't turn up. Meanwhile, Malik was becoming more reckless. His greed growing, he started taking more risks, pocketing anything valuable he could find in Vanessa's home during their meetings. He figured she wouldn't notice, or if she did, she'd be too scared to confront him. After all, she had just as much to lose as he did, but Vanessa wasn't as naive as Malik thought. As weeks passed, Vanessa's guilt began to weigh heavily on her. She wasn't just betraying her husband, she was putting everything at risk. Yet Malik had a way of pulling her back in every time she tried to distance herself. He'd whisper sweet nothings, promise her the world, and remind her that life with Charles was nothing compared to what he could offer. What Vanessa didn't know was that Malik was playing the same game with other women, including one of her closest friends, Jasmine Rivera. Jasmine had always admired Vanessa's lifestyle, her elegance, her marriage to a wealthy man. But deep down, she resented her, and when she discovered Malik, she saw an opportunity. She approached Malik with her own proposition, offering him even more money if he would leave Vanessa and be with her instead. Malik, ever the opportunist, agreed, but keeping up the act with both women was becoming more difficult. As the tension between Malik and Vanessa grew, Charles's suspicions intensified. He began questioning Vanessa more often, and though she tried to lie, he could see through her facade. Charles hired a private investigator, and soon enough the truth came crashing down. Malik, meanwhile, was beginning to panic. The pressure from Jasmine, Vanessa's growing paranoia, and Charles's looming presence were starting to close in on him. He confided in his mentor, Tony Briggs, a ruthless man who had built his empire by exploiting people like Malik. Tony warned him to be careful, to lay low for a while, but Malik couldn't resist. The money, the power, the thrill, it was all too much for him to walk away from. Then came the day everything changed. Vanessa, in a moment of vulnerability, confessed everything to Malik. She told him about Charles's suspicions, about the investigator, about how she feared her life was about to fall apart. Malik, sensing an opportunity, played the role of the protective lover. He promised to take care of everything, to handle Charles. What Vanessa didn't know was that Malik had no intention of protecting her. He was going to use her vulnerability to his advantage, to drain every last penny from her before disappearing for good. But Vanessa wasn't the only one with a plan. Jasmine, growing increasingly impatient with Malik's games, confronted him. She threatened to expose everything if he didn't leave Vanessa immediately. Malik, desperate to keep both women in his control, tried to juggle the situation, promising Jasmine he'd end things with Vanessa soon. But Jasmine wasn't buying it. She gave him an ultimatum: end it, or she'd go to Charles herself. In a panic, Malik made a fatal mistake. He stole Charles's prized possession, a rare vintage watch worth millions, and planned to pawn it, hoping to make a quick escape with the cash. But when Charles discovered the theft, everything unraveled. Charles, enraged by the missing watch, confronted Vanessa that evening. The calm and composed businessman had finally cracked. He demanded to know where his belongings had gone, and when Vanessa hesitated, the truth spilled out. She admitted to the affair with Malik, trembling as she described how everything had spiraled out of control. But she left out one crucial detail: Malik's theft of the watch. She was too scared to admit that part, knowing it would push Charles over the edge. Charles, barely able to contain his fury, stormed out of the house. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. He called Detective Laura Evans, an old friend from his college days who had climbed her way up the ranks to become one of the most respected investigators in the state. Laura had dealt with high-profile cases before, but this one was personal. She had always respected Charles, and when he asked for her help, she couldn't refuse. Within hours, Laura had begun her investigation into Malik Johnson. She quickly discovered his shady past: multiple relationships with wealthy women, a string of thefts that had been carefully covered up, and connections to Tony Briggs, a name that sent chills down her spine. Tony was known for running an underground network of criminals, and anyone tied to him was bound to be trouble. Laura knew she had to tread carefully. As Laura dug deeper, Malik was spiraling. The walls were closing in, and he could feel the noose tightening around his neck. He knew Charles was coming for him, and Jasmine's threats were becoming more real by the day. In a desperate attempt to escape, Malik reached out to Tony for help. Tony, however, was not the kind of man who helped without a price. He made it clear to Malik that he had become a liability. Malik begged for one last favor. He needed a way out, a way to disappear without leaving a trace. Tony, cold and calculating, agreed, but only under one condition. Malik would owe him a debt, one that could be called in at any time. Reluctantly, Malik agreed, knowing he had no other choice. Meanwhile, Vanessa's guilt was eating her alive. She had ruined her marriage, betrayed Charles, and now her affair with Malik had spiraled into something far darker than she had ever imagined. She considered going to the police, but she couldn't bear the thought of facing the consequences. Jasmine, on the other hand, was growing more dangerous by the day. She had become obsessed with Malik, convinced that he was hers alone, and she wasn't about to let Vanessa get in the way. As the tension built, Charles grew more determined to catch Malik. With Laura's help, he uncovered the truth about the stolen watch, and when he confronted Vanessa once again, this time she couldn't hide it. She broke down, confessing everything: how Malik had stolen from him, how she had been manipulated, how it had all gone so horribly wrong. Charles, his mind clouded with anger, made a decision. He was going to end this once and for all. He tracked Malik down to a seedy hotel on the outskirts of town, where Malik had been hiding out, waiting for Tony's plan to unfold. But Charles wasn't the only one hunting Malik. Jasmine, driven by jealousy and a twisted sense of love, had also tracked Malik down. She arrived at the hotel just moments before Charles, and what she found shattered her. Malik was packing his bags, ready to disappear without a word. Furious, Jasmine confronted him, demanding to know why he was leaving her behind. Malik, his patience worn thin, told her the truth. She was just another pawn in his game. He had never cared about her, never planned to take her with him. For him, it had always been about the money. In a fit of rage, Jasmine lashed out, slapping Malik across the face. The confrontation escalated quickly, with Jasmine threatening to expose everything. She screamed at Malik, calling him a liar, a thief, and a coward. But before she could leave, Malik snapped. In a blind moment of fury, Malik grabbed Jasmine by the throat, his hands tightening around her neck as he slammed her against the wall. The room grew deadly quiet as Jasmine struggled, her eyes wide with terror. And then, in a heartbeat, it was over. Jasmine's lifeless body slumped to the floor, her neck twisted at an unnatural angle. Malik stood over her, his chest heaving, the reality of what he had just done slowly sinking in. He was a killer now, but he didn't have time to process what had just happened. As he scrambled to gather his things, Charles burst into the room, his face contorted with rage. He had come for answers, but what he found was far worse than he had imagined. There, in the dim light of the hotel room, lay Jasmine's body and Malik, standing over her. Charles lunged at Malik, but Malik was quicker. They struggled, fists flying, as the two men fought for control. But Malik, hardened by years of survival, overpowered Charles, slamming him to the ground. In a desperate move, Malik grabbed a heavy lamp from the bedside table and brought it down on Charles's head, the sickening thud echoing through the room. Charles lay motionless on the floor, blood pooling around his head as Malik stood over him, panting, his hands shaking from the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He hadn't meant to kill him, not this way. Malik's mind raced, realizing that he had now crossed a line from which there was no return. Two bodies lay at his feet, both dead by his hand, and he knew that time was running out. Malik grabbed the duffel bag filled with the stolen jewelry and cash, but as he turned to leave, the sound of sirens filled the air. Panic set in. Tony's plan had failed. There was no escape now. Just as Malik was about to bolt out of the room, Detective Laura Evans and Officer Adam Pierce stormed into the hotel, guns drawn. "Drop the bag! Hands up!" Laura's voice cut through the tense silence. Malik froze, his back to the door, weighing his options. He was surrounded with nowhere to run, but surrendering meant life in prison, or worse. Malik slowly raised his hands, letting the duffel bag fall to the floor. He turned to face Laura, his expression a mixture of fear and defiance. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way," he muttered under his breath, as Adam quickly moved in to cuff him. Laura's eyes scanned the room, landing on Charles's lifeless body and Jasmine's twisted form. The scene before her was one of pure chaos. 2 murders in one night, and Malik at the center of it all. As Malik was led away in handcuffs, the weight of his actions finally sank in. The life he had built, the manipulations, the lies, the money, it was all gone now. He had lost control, and there was no turning back. His face, once smooth and composed, now bore the hollow look of a man who had lost everything. Vanessa, meanwhile, sat alone in her home, her heart heavy with guilt and shame. She had never imagined it would come to this. Her affair with Malik had spiraled into a nightmare, one that had cost her everything, her marriage, her dignity, and now the life of her friend. When the phone rang and she learned of Charles's death, her world shattered completely. The trial that followed became a media circus, with Malik at the center of it all. His past exploits as a gigolo, his ties to Tony Briggs's criminal enterprise, and the twisted love triangle between him, Vanessa, and Charles captivated the public's imagination. It seemed like something out of a movie, an affair gone terribly wrong with deadly consequences. During the trial, Malik's defense team tried to paint him as a victim of circumstance, a man caught up in a dangerous game he couldn't control. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. The stolen jewelry, the testimonies from Vanessa and Tony Briggs's associates, and the cold, hard facts of the murders left little doubt in the jury's mind. Detective Laura Evans sat in the courtroom, watching as the final moments of Malik's fate played out. She had seen cases like this before, lives destroyed by greed, lust, and power, but there was something about this one that haunted her. Maybe it was the way Malik had played his hand, thinking he could outsmart everyone. Or maybe it was the way Vanessa had been pulled into the mess, a victim of her own choices. In the end, Malik was found guilty of both murders and sentenced to life without parole. As he was led away, his once confident swagger was gone, replaced by the weight of a life destroyed by his own making. Vanessa, too, was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. She had lost Charles, her husband, the man she had once loved but betrayed. The guilt of her role in the tragedy hung over her like a dark cloud, and though she wasn't facing prison time, her punishment was living with the knowledge of what she had done. The media moved on to the next scandal, but for those involved, the pain lingered. Jasmine's family mourned her loss, and the Caldwell family was left broken, wondering how it had all gone so horribly wrong. As for Malik, he sat in his prison cell, staring at the cold concrete walls, his mind replaying the choices that had led him here. The once charismatic man who had built his life on seduction and manipulation was now just another prisoner, lost in the system. His rise and fall had been swift, and now all that was left were the memories of a life consumed by greed and betrayal. In the end, there were no winners in this story, only the cold reality of lives destroyed by deception, lust, and violence. The aftermath of Malik's sentencing left a trail of shattered lives. Vanessa, now alone and racked with guilt, became a recluse. The once vibrant, confident woman who had charmed Charles and Malik was gone, replaced by someone hollow, weighed down by her actions. She had betrayed the man she loved, gotten caught up in a deadly affair, and lost everything in the process. The media frenzy surrounding the trial died down, but the whispers in her small community didn't. Everyone knew her name, her face, knew what she had done. She tried to go about her life, but every corner of her home was a reminder of Charles, the love they once shared before it was tainted by her affair with Malik. Every time she saw his picture, she felt a stabbing guilt. She avoided public places, knowing the sideways glances and hushed whispers would only bring the pain rushing back. And though she was free, it didn't feel like it. Malik, now imprisoned for life, spent his days reflecting on his choices. His cell was a constant reminder of the life he'd destroyed, his own and the lives of those he'd dragged down with him. The seductive charm, the smooth words that had once been his greatest weapons, were useless in a place where no one cared about his past. He was just another prisoner, trapped in a system that he couldn't escape. Tony Briggs, Malik's boss, watched from the sidelines as Malik's empire crumbled. He had been careful enough to distance himself from the chaos, ensuring his hands stayed clean while Malik took the fall. Tony's influence stretched far beyond what anyone realized, and while Malik had been a useful tool, he was ultimately disposable. Tony had seen too many men like Malik come and go, reckless, thinking they could outsmart everyone else. But Tony knew better. He had survived in this world because he played the long game, staying in the shadows, never drawing too much attention. With Malik behind bars, Tony quickly moved on, filling the void left by his downfall. The criminal underworld thrived on chaos, and Tony knew how to navigate it better than anyone. He had seen too much, learned too many lessons the hard way to ever get caught in a situation like Malik's. Detective Laura Evans, who had brought Malik to justice, wasn't content. She had solved the case, closed the file, but something still felt off. She couldn't shake the feeling that there were deeper layers to the story, things that hadn't come to light in court. Tony Briggs's name had come up in whispers, but there had never been enough evidence to tie him to anything directly, and that bothered her. Laura spent sleepless nights going over the case files, trying to piece together the parts that didn't add up. She was a seasoned detective, but this case had gotten under her skin in ways others hadn't. Maybe it was the complexity of the relationships, the way Malik had played everyone against each other, or maybe it was the gut feeling that Tony was still pulling strings behind the scenes. As months passed, Laura found herself drawn back into the investigation, even though it was officially closed. She knew she was treading dangerous ground, especially when it came to Tony, but she couldn't let it go. She started digging into his past, his connections, the people who had mysteriously disappeared after crossing him. Jasmine Rivera, Vanessa's closest friend, had watched everything unfold from a distance. She had tried to warn Vanessa about Malik, sensing that something wasn't right with him from the start, but Vanessa hadn't listened, blinded by her attraction to the man who would eventually destroy her life. Jasmine had stayed silent throughout the trial, knowing that her words wouldn't have made a difference then. But now, as Vanessa spiraled deeper into her guilt and isolation, Jasmine couldn't stay quiet any longer. One evening, Jasmine showed up at Vanessa's door, determined to confront her about what had happened. Vanessa, pale and broken, opened the door but said nothing. Jasmine stepped inside, the weight of their friendship hanging heavily in the air. "Vanessa," Jasmine started, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "You have to let go of this. I know you're hurting, but this guilt you're carrying, it's going to destroy you. Charles is gone, Malik is in prison, but you're still here. You can't keep punishing yourself." Vanessa, tears in her eyes, looked at Jasmine and whispered, "I can't escape it. Every day I wake up and I see what I've done. It's all my fault." Jasmine shook her head. Malik played you. He played all of us. But you're not responsible for everything that happened. You made mistakes, but so did they. You have to start rebuilding your life, or you'll never be free." Vanessa broke down, sobbing in Jasmine's arms, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to let go of some of the pain. It wasn't a complete release, but it was a start. Meanwhile, Detective Evans's investigation into Tony Briggs was gaining momentum. She had uncovered a web of illegal dealings, hidden assets, and connections that stretched far beyond Malik's operations. Tony had covered his tracks well, but Laura was relentless. She knew this would be the most dangerous case of her career, but she wasn't backing down. One night, after months of surveillance, Laura finally got the break she needed. A former associate of Tony's came forward offering to testify against him in exchange for immunity. The case that had seemed impossible to crack was now wide open. Laura, with the backing of the FBI, launched a massive raid on Tony's operations. It was a takedown years in the making, and when it was over, Tony Briggs was behind bars, charged with multiple counts of racketeering, conspiracy, and murder. Vanessa, now slowly rebuilding her life, watched the news of Tony's arrest from her living room. She felt a sense of closure, knowing that the man who had orchestrated so much destruction was finally paying for his crimes. It didn't bring Charles back, and it didn't erase the pain she had caused, but it gave her a small glimmer of hope for the future. As for Malik, he spent the rest of his life in prison, a cautionary tale of ambition, betrayal, and greed. The man who had once charmed his way into the lives of powerful people now spent his days in isolation, haunted by the choices that had led him there. In the end, the story of Malik Johnson, Vanessa Caldwell, and Charles Caldwell became a legend in the criminal underworld, a story of love, lies, and deadly consequences. And for those left behind, the scars remained, but life slowly moved on. Vanessa tried to move on after Tony Briggs's arrest, but the underworld's grip on her life was far from over. Even with Malik behind bars and Tony's empire in ruins, there were still loose ends that threatened to unravel everything. Vanessa's name had become entangled in the criminal world, and there were whispers, rumors circulating that Vanessa knew more than she let on. She had seen too much, and those left behind in Tony's circle were growing restless. One night, a knock at Vanessa's door shattered the silence. Jasmine had come over again, as she often did now, trying to keep Vanessa from falling into deeper despair. But this knock was different, urgent, sharp. Vanessa's heart pounded as she cautiously opened the door, only to find Bianca Reynolds standing there, her face flushed with fear. Bianca, a former client of Malik's and now someone trying to stay off the radar, was in over her head. She had been close to Tony Briggs, closer than Vanessa had realized. Bianca wasn't just another client. She had been a part of Tony's inner circle, handling discreet deals and keeping some of his darkest secrets. And now that Tony was gone, the people who were after him were after her too. "They're coming for me, Vanessa," Bianca blurted out as she pushed her way inside. "Tony's people, the ones who didn't go down in the raid, they think I know where his money is stashed, but I don't. I swear I don't." Vanessa exchanged a nervous glance with Jasmine, who was equally startled by the unexpected visit. "What do you want me to do?" Vanessa asked, her voice trembling. Bianca looked around frantically, pacing the room. "You were married to Charles. You knew Tony's business, even if you didn't realize it at the time. You have to help me, Vanessa. If they think you know something, they'll come for you next." Vanessa's heart raced. She had been trying so hard to distance herself from the mess Malik had left behind, but it seemed like every step forward only pulled her deeper into the shadows. And now, with Bianca bringing more trouble to her doorstep, Vanessa felt the walls closing in. Jasmine stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "We need to think. If these people think you have information, Bianca, it's only a matter of time before they come for Vanessa too." The room was thick with tension as the three women tried to figure out their next move. Vanessa knew she had to act quickly. Staying passive would only put her in more danger. But the deeper she went, the more dangerous things became. She couldn't trust anyone, not even the police, who had already written her off as a troubled widow trying to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. Bianca revealed that she had once handled a secret offshore account for Tony, money that wasn't touched by the authorities. She didn't know where it all was, but she knew enough to make her a target. "I didn't take anything, I swear," she said, her voice shaking, "but they think I did. And if they find out I came to you—" Vanessa's mind raced. The logical thing to do was to turn Bianca over to the authorities, to wash her hands of the mess. But she knew that doing so could drag her back into the investigation, and she was terrified of being pulled back under. As the night wore on, the three women hatched a desperate plan. Vanessa would use her connections to Charles's old business contacts, people who might still be loyal to her late husband, to arrange for Bianca to disappear. They would fake a paper trail, making it seem like Bianca had fled the country, leaving just enough breadcrumbs for Tony's old associates to chase. It was risky, and if they were caught, the consequences would be dire. But it was the only option. The next few days were a blur of secrecy and tension. Vanessa, Jasmine, and Bianca worked tirelessly to cover Bianca's tracks, using fake IDs and burner phones to create a false narrative. Detective Laura Evans, who had once been a source of solace for Vanessa, was now someone to avoid. Vanessa couldn't risk anyone, not even Laura, knowing about the plan. As they waited for the plan to unfold, Vanessa's paranoia grew. She felt eyes on her at all times, shadows lurking around every corner. Even Jasmine, her closest friend, began to act strangely, and Vanessa wondered if there was more to her involvement than she was letting on. Had Jasmine known more about Malik's activities than she had ever admitted? Was she hiding something? Tensions came to a head one night when Jasmine, Bianca, and Vanessa were holed up in Vanessa's house, waiting for news that Bianca had successfully disappeared. There was a knock at the door, soft but insistent. Vanessa's heart skipped a beat as she and the others exchanged a glance. "Who could that be?" she whispered. They cautiously opened the door to find Officer Adam Pierce, Detective Evans's right-hand man, standing there. His face was grim, his eyes scanning the three women. "Vanessa, we need to talk," Pierce said, stepping inside. "Something's come up in the investigation, and it involves you." Fear surged through Vanessa as Pierce pulled out a photograph, an image of her, Malik, and Jasmine taken at a party months before everything fell apart. It wasn't a random picture. It was evidence. "I need to know what you're hiding," Pierce said, his voice low and demanding. "You were closer to this than we thought, and now Bianca Reynolds is missing. So what's really going on?" Vanessa felt her world collapsing around her. She glanced at Jasmine, who was frozen in place, fear etched across her face. Bianca shifted nervously, her eyes darting toward the back door. It was in that moment that Vanessa realized the full scope of the betrayal. Jasmine had been involved with Malik and Tony all along. She had played both sides, pretending to be Vanessa's friend, while helping Malik siphon money from Charles's accounts. And now, with everything falling apart, she was willing to throw Vanessa under the bus to save herself. But before Vanessa could react, Bianca bolted for the back door. Officer Pierce shouted after her, but it was too late. Bianca was gone, running for her life. Chaos erupted. Pierce radioed for backup as Jasmine tried to explain herself, but Vanessa wasn't listening. The betrayal cut too deep, the lies too tangled. And now, everything was spiraling out of control. In the end, Vanessa was left standing alone in her living room, the echoes of her shattered life ringing in her ears. Malik was gone, Jasmine had betrayed her, and Bianca had vanished into the night. And as the sirens wailed in the distance, Vanessa realized that there was no escaping the web of lies and deceit that had ensnared her from the very beginning. The final blow came when Officer Pierce turned to Vanessa and said, "You're not innocent in this, Vanessa. We're going to have to take you in for questioning." Vanessa's world went dark as the weight of her choices finally crushed her. The tangled web of betrayal, greed, and murder had claimed its final victim.